Welcome to the commentary section of the conference, the last half of the conference program at the Global Forum on Nicotine in Warsaw, and it's a pleasure and honor for me to have two distinguished experts in their own areas of work related to nicotine and tobacco regulation. I'm Sudhanshu Patwardhan, Director for Center for Health Research and Education based in the UK, working in the UK and India in tobacco harm reduction. And I have with me Dr. Marina Foltea from Trade Pacts, MD of Trade Pacts, Geneva-based consultancy firm expertise in international trade law and public affairs. Welcome, Marina. And I also have Sam Hampshire, Director, US-based Botec Analysis, a policy researcher and specializing in the unintended consequences of regulation. So that kind of gives a flavor of what we're going to have in terms of discussion. And it's perfect timing because we just managed to, between the three of us, attend the sessions before this. And just to read out what you all have been seeing around the world, and I've been told that at least 70 countries, people are watching this live, and that again kind of brings us to the point of this is a global forum on nicotine, so it has to have a global flavor. Why don't I start with Sam, and then I kind of work towards Marina in terms of what you saw in the previous session, what you think about how the conference is going. I believe this is the first time you're here?
This is Sam? The first time, yeah. So very happy to be here and grateful for the opportunity for speaking here. What a great conference. I mean, as you said, this is a global forum, and I think in order to do that successfully, you need to bring in multiple different disciplines, different perspectives. So having participants, viewers, an audience of 70 countries, Mark Tyndall's pyramid of different researchers, activists, disruptors. I don't think that was his word, but let's call them disruptors. Shows some of the different kind of perspectives that are kind of being brought together. That creates a great discussion, which is exactly what's needed.
Yeah, no, I think you, and looks like both you and Marina managed to attend the session, panel 6, the prohibition by stealth.
Correct.
Using tax and regulation to block tobacco harm reduction. Marina, what was your kind of immediate takeaway from the kind of discussion happening there?
Well, why prohibition by stealth? Why is it called by stealth? Because we can call it prohibition, meaning that there will be a law saying that something is prohibited, so saying that EVPs are prohibited. But there is a whole category of measures there which are not called prohibitions in practice, but by being quite restrictive in their nature, they do have quite a prohibitive effect on the industry in case. So that's why the session actually looked not only on what we know as prohibition, that, for example, you take completely a product out of the market or you deny access to the market, but the product may be in the market, but it's regulated such that the effect on consumption almost amounts to a prohibition of that product.
Yeah, and look, I mean, you make a very good point, and this is very close to my heart in the work we do at CHRE, our center, and we work in disadvantaged populations in the UK, where this sort of string of words we like to keep on talking about, and affordability, availability, accessibility of products, tobacco harm reduction products, or safer nicotine products, call it what you want, but something that's got a scientific rationale for being safer than the current forms of risky products. And we see that any of these things are missing, be it accessibility, affordability, or availability. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the consumer, current consumer, is definitely going to be impacted.
And I would add appeal to that list as well.
Appeal, of course. The 4 A's, I forgot. I was wondering,
well,
what's the 4? I was like, what am I missing? Thanks, Sam.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's important because, I mean, and as a distinction, I think it's important to say that when regulators choose not to prohibit, not to actually ban, either as a de facto or as a de jure approach, the unintended consequences that they're looking to avoid are not they're not foregone. So in terms of creating an illicit market, creating unintended health consequences, suppressing the opportunity to age-gate sales, these are all things that might stem from bans they're also things that we see to be associated with overly stringent restrictions.
Absolutely.
And if you take desirable characteristics, that's the affordability component. If you take desirable characteristics out of the market, or if you take certain markets away from certain groups, then you're going to see those unintended consequences.
So how does this fit in? I just want to sort of throw it open for conversation. We talk about taxation has been touted, and there's enough scientific evidence base about how taxation has played a big role in reducing the tobacco use prevalence globally over the years. Would that be something you would agree with in principle?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so affordability was definitely understood as a criteria for nudging people towards healthier behaviors or whatever the agenda was, but at least that was the instrument used to get people to have lesser affordability for risky products. And of course, that logically means that for them to have access to safer products, but affordable, you would think that the tax regime that's applied to this suite of harm reduction products has to be much more lenient. Is that right? Would that be the argument from a proportionality point of view or differential point of view?
Yes, the whole point of taxation would link to actually the risk, because the idea of excise has some risk element in mind. So the argument here is that the less risky the product is, the less the tax should be. And that's the economists that say that. Indeed, the high taxation is one of those measures which can inhibit the affordability. You can have the accessibility, meaning the products are there in the market,
Sure.
so there is no trade per se restriction to import. They can be placed on the market, but then you make them unaffordable, and the effect is just the same if you do not consider the risk profile in taxing.
Any thoughts on that, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree. I think that using regulation to create differentials to encourage consumers to switch to safer products has to be the goal. The key component of being successful in that approach is, I think, to also take steps to protect against uptake by non-smokers, particularly non-smoking youth. And I don't think those are exclusive trade-offs. I think there are ways that you can create differentials with nuances to signal to non-smokers that this isn't a product for them. And a lot of my work focuses on how to kind of outline that, how to detail those. Another thing I'll say about the creation of policy differentials is that we know these are substitute products. So when we're creating the differential, we're not only focused on what the details of the policy should be towards e-cigarettes, but what the details of the policy should be towards more dangerous alternatives, so combustibles. And if you have the availability of accessible, affordable, safer alternatives, that can actually allow you to ramp up restrictions on combustibles as a way to nudge consumers to safer choices as well. So as an example of that, I'm lucky enough to work with an econometrician called Jim Prieger, who's a professor of public policy at Pepperdine. He and I did a piece of work with some colleagues looking at the EU, and particularly how the availability of e-cigarettes attenuates smokers' tendency to respond to increased taxation by embracing illicit markets. If you make these products more available, more accessible, that tendency is reduced.
Yeah.
So if they're sufficiently available, then that unintended consequence goes away, which means you can get the desirable kind of health consequences.
It is so complex, isn't it? I look at this and coming to the GFN, this is a decade plus of GFNs happening, and I've been there since the beginning, and I realize how the discussion, the complexity of the issues, but the discussion around all these issues have been now, there's a spotlight put on all of these, and I think what I love about the GFN personally is that there's a very clear attempt and successful attempt actually to bring these together in the same forum, the same place. And it really excites me to see consumer advocates who have always been a mainstay of this conference, which is important because, hey, what are we doing this all about?
Yeah.
This is about the consumer, right?
Yeah.
The current consumer who is struggling to get alternatives which are affordable, available, appealing, and accessible. And what are the roadblocks to do that? And I think legal arguments, international trade arguments, Marina, as you are an expert on and you have been analyzing policy choices that governments and policymakers have to make. And I think not just policy choices by policymakers, but also folks at different levels of the hierarchy of decision making.
Yeah.
So, for example, I look at choices made by healthcare practitioners, and that's a topic that's close to my work, my heart, and that is, how do they make choices? Are they informed to make those choices? And it often comes down to what is being fed to them through emerging science and how they are responding to it. One thing I really loved about what David Sweener said in the other session that I was watching, and this was the one about safer nicotine, human rights and legal challenges. And that was a fabulous panel, and I wish we could have all of these happening one after the other, because with parallel sessions, you're always having to make very hard choices.
Yeah, trade-offs.
Trade-offs, hey, of course, yes, indeed. And that just shows that this, again, the breadth of the issues we are dealing with requires us to do this. I mean, I'm hoping that the conference stretches to at least 3 or 4 days from next year, which allows even longer and deeper discussions on a whole wide range of topics. But what David said, there was everyone should be engaging their frontal lobes. Now, of course, David is a lawyer, but he also has very clever analogies from medicine and
Yes.
from literature. He was quoting Shakespeare in one sentence and then giving such very smart insights into human behavioral decision-making sort of things. And I think that's a call he's making for policymakers, but also from the argument was about human rights and accessing products. And I think for the first time, all the panelists were saying that for the very first time, we are actually having clarity on the need for raising the profile of human rights, the natural right of a consumer to want and need these products. Mm-hmm. And often we have, over the years, kind of forgotten that consumers are even there, and there's a lot of stigma around it. Any thoughts from your expertise in sort of international trade, but also how does human right and trade and international law come in? And then maybe after that, Sam, you can touch on how does policy making and analysis around that fit with that? Marina?
Well, it's interesting that human rights is supported by a very complex web of international treaties. And when it comes to human rights and what is relevant for this debate, in my view, apart from the fact that access should be had to the products, it's actually the right to health. And the right to health has certain elements inside, and one of the elements is actually information. So every time the government feels or has data to show to the consumer that something could reduce harms in certain circumstances, they actually have the duty to inform the consumer. And in this situation, we see we have a bit of a challenge here that things are not really accepted, and as a result, the governments are not the ones to do their job in terms of information, because this should come from information. But governments have actually this obligation which arises from these specific treaties, and the right to health specifically. And then we move from health, we can move to another regime which links more to economics. We can say it's more pragmatic trade, so on. And that regime, if we speak about international trade law, the bans actually are a bit of a problem under this regime, because you shouldn't be banning products for trade. So they shouldn't, you have the right to export, to import, etc. And there should be certain very serious circumstances that you ban a product. And then an interesting element to add to that is that I have looked into discrimination, comparing the status of cigarettes compared to the new product, to only see that in some countries the e-cigarettes, e-vapor cigarettes are more regulated than cigarettes, which again misses the point of harm reduction and the fact that regulation should be based on risk. And this basing of the risk of the regulation emerges from different areas and different international regimes. And this is human rights, this is international trade law, this is investment law, and even humanitarian law. You know, when we conduct, not we, but when some people conduct war, the attack should be, or the counterattack should be proportionate to attack. So this same philosophy applies actually in all the other areas of law, and with regards to specific products like e-vapor products.
Sure, and I think if I was to just extend that analogy, I think you very specifically mentioned about e-vapor products because that's the area you're working and researching
Exactly,
on.
yeah.
And I think when I look at harm reduction, I actually I take a step back. And Sam, I want to come back to you on this question, but I just want to just mention one thing which struck me as a very strange paradox, because I was looking at the right to health, the human rights angle in that session, and it reminded me of this fact that the WHO, the World Health Organization, has, you may or may not be aware, has an essential medicines list. And nicotine replacement therapy products are on that model essential medicines list.
Exactly, yeah.
And then countries which actually have now effectively banned certain types of products also have they're copy-pasted because that's what the expectation is. The WHO has a list, and then countries take on things from there which is relevant to them. For example, India, where we work, has nicotine replacement on their essential medicines list. Now, that doesn't translate into the fact that nicotine gums and lozenges, at least, let's move to e-vapor products afterward, but even the basic approved nicotine replacement products are not available. They're not affordable, but they're not even available, and they're very rarely available in pharmacies. And then, of course, healthcare practitioners are not even trained enough to prescribe or advise their patients on how to use them. So we suddenly get into a space where, and then the same global organizations, and the same global organizations are also, for some reason, at the forefront of prohibiting harm reduction as a principle. Forget specific products. What is influencing the policymakers, Sam, and then we'll sort of wrap up.
So much to say here. Let me go back to the first question and then try and come at the second one.
We have about a minute and a half, by the way.
A minute and a half. Okay. Well, let me try and make it very quick. Anyone watching this will recognise that this is a polarised debate. Through that debate, there has been one persistent line, and I'd say line rather than lie, but that there isn't evidence. There is evidence. And when we present this as a debate that's detached from the evidence, it becomes about values. We all have, there are different values. What we're talking about here are different elements of the conversation, and there are different values that might be attached to that. But we need to keep it about what the evidence suggests. So that was one of the reasons why the conversation about stealth prohibition was so effective, because we can begin to see the unintended consequences of regulation. We can begin to see the unintended consequences of not educating stakeholders, not educating consumers, not empowering healthcare providers to have those conversations. And so the path forward is increasingly clear. And I think one of the reasons why it is clear is because we've provided a forum to have that conversation.
No, absolutely agreed. I think what I see as the kind of where to from here, we all pack up at the end of the day today, go back to wherever we are working, you to the US, you in Switzerland, I'll go back to the UK and to India for every so often to continue our work in this space and trying to sort of bring sense to the conversation around harm reduction and how it should be practically implemented. I am looking forward to the next few years of hopefully what we have seen and started here over the last decade, but it getting amplified and really use the network effects of what we have started talking about. Always with the consumer at the center, I hope. That's the key. And I keep on trying to remind people, and of course, it's not for just one or two of us to do that. I think we should look around and we have to be reminded that this keeps us sort of
accountable.
Yeah. And I think it's also a very objective debate. We shouldn't let emotion overrun this. It's about engaging the frontal lobe to say, look, let's just be objective about the decision-making process. But what a great thing to have such diversity in terms of expertise and geographical spread as well, in fact, I realize later.
Absolutely.
It's a great event and brings in people from different backgrounds. So quite unique in these terms.
Yeah, I wouldn't have imagined 20 years ago when I finished medical school that I would be sitting with an international law expert and an international policy expert and discussing tobacco and nicotine, which was always sort of just a problem, solve it, tell a patient to stop, and that's it. But,
well, I also never imagined I could sit in the same room with psychiatrists, for example.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's so many different stakeholders, right? And they all have a role to play. But look, I will wait for getting the signal to stop this. Until then, I will keep on talking, obviously.
Let's do it.
Good. So look, Thank you so much, Marina and Sam. And
Thank you.
I will let those who are watching this live and hopefully people watching this later on to catch up and pick up on things. All the best for their contribution to tobacco harm reduction, because let's not forget, all the stuff we do here should be with the mind that 1.3, if you count the smokeless tobacco users globally, 1.3 billion people will be positively impacted by your actions. And not just 1.3, in fact, because they are the users and their families, their social circle, their society, their country are impacted equally. And so let's do that. Let's keep that in the mind in every action we do. So with that, I will pass on to the production team, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.